When he awoke, he was still screaming. But as he recognized the familiar surroundings of his bedroom, lit up by the morning sun, he calmed down. He noticed his grumbling stomach and went into the kitchen for his breakfast. His heart jumped with joy as he saw his mother already preparing his favorite cereal for him. When he noticed the tears in her eyes, his little mind shortly felt confused until he remembered that his father had died a few days ago. That must be the reason why Mama is crying, he thought. Then his thought process was disrupted when his mother extended her hand and handed him a little plastic figurine she had fished out of the cornflakes box. A character from an American cartoon he loved so much, he couldn't wait to show it to his friends at school. What else would await him at school today? Hopefully they would learn something more about dinosaurs. That was really exciting. After he had finished writing, Sid fell asleep, facing the monsters of his own mind in his dreams. He found himself in a strange room that seemed to be made up mostly of plastic. He had come out of the shower and was wearing nothing but a towel. When he turned around, a girl followed him into the room. She was quite young, although her age seemed to differ whenever he looked at her. As he sat down on her plastic bed to get dressed, she began to undress, and suddenly she jumped up onto him, completely naked, and began to kiss him. But her lips felt wet, and as if they had been in water for too long, and wrinkled, just like her fingers that grabbed his back. Sid felt sick as she pressed her cold flaps of meat against his lips, and water began to flow out of them. Her face began to turn green, and suddenly she transformed into a giant frog that was trying to devour him. Sid opened his eyes and stared up at a plastic moon on a small blue cloud with stars that was hanging above him. After a few moments, he realized that it was the lamp in his little cousin's room, who was still sleeping in the bed beside him, still sounding as if he was going through nightmares as well, sighing and shaking in his sleep every once in a while. How do you dream on when all your dreams turn into nightmares? Sid wondered. Finally, one of the shivers that shook his little cousin was too strong, and he awoke from his dreams with a suppressed, silent scream. But when he noticed Sid lying on the floor beside him, a smile appeared on his face, and he asked if they could play. Sid told him they should have some breakfast first, and so they went over into the kitchen and toasted some bread. Sid put on music on his laptop, and his little cousin began to dance around the flat. But then, Sid took a quick shower, and when he came back out, Ben was glued to his screen again. This time, that of his little game machine on which he tried to kill as many bad guys as possible. He stared at it with a grim and almost hypnotized look on his face, as sounds of explosions and screams came out of it. Sid tried to lure him away by putting on the music video of an American rock band he had once shown to him when he had been about 4 years old and wanted to know if Dan had any cars on his computer. Sid had found the film that showed a taxi driver kidnapping the lead singer to drive him around the city at full speed and dance manically in a tunnel. Since then, Ben always asked for it whenever Sid visited him, and he watched it over and over again, singing along in a made-up language and dancing through the room. Sid could sense that there was a musical vein in the young boy. He remembered a family gathering they had once had at a small rural residence to celebrate his parents' marriage, where Ben had found a piano in the main hall on which he had begun to play. He had never even seen a piano before and did not have any kind of musical training, but the music simply flew out of him and guided his fingers on the white ebony. It had sounded like a professional work of free jazz, and Ben had sat there, completely lost in the music, in total concentration. His mother had recorded a part of it, and still listened to it from time to time. His favorite part was a moment towards the end, when he could hear their grandfather interrupting him to tell him how well he played. Ben had begun to yell at him, enraged and frustrated that he had ripped him out of his flow. Sid sometimes wondered to what extent they were really related, but this incident made him relate to the little child like never before. Unfortunately, a piano was expensive, and there weren't many possibilities of learning how to play in the small town he lived in. Still, Sid was determined to keep his creative side alive, and so he showed Ben how to headbang, and they turned in circles to the music, until they tumbled through the flat and fell to the floor in exhaustion. After listening to the song for the 5th time, Sid convinced Ben that they should go outside and ride bikes down to the lake. Ben got dressed and they went to the little garden shed to get the bikes, which they rode around in the nearby woods for a while, where they found a meadow with horses. As they fed them, Ben touched the newly built fence with curious eyes, and before Sid could say anything, he had gotten an electric shock. He was too surprised to cry, so he just said, "I'm not doing that again." And they rode on to the little boat shed his father had remade a few years ago into a comfortable little holiday house. The sky was still gray. The water seemed inviting though, and so they went swimming. Sid lay back to float in silence and stare into the sky, but his little cousin came paddling towards him and demanded his attention. After getting out and drying themselves, they rode back up the hill to the flat, where they ate a warm soup to warm up again. When Sid began to fill the dishwasher with the plates they had just used, Ben ran over into the living room, and when Sid was done cleaning up, he found him there sitting on the floor, staring at the screen again. But the doorbell rang, and his friend Lucas asked if he wanted to play. So they all sat down in the living room to play a card game he had bought because it was sold with the characters from the animated series he had just been watching. For a while, everything went quite well. But when Ben continued to lose, he started to get upset. His little sister came running into the room and began to throw the cards into the air. Ben screamed, Lucas screamed, Maya screamed, and Simone yelled over from the kitchen. Sid tried to get the two boys over into Ben's room in order to cool down the situation. But when they went on to play with action figures that were also based on the series, Ben and Lucas got into an argument over which of their figures was more powerful, and Ben suddenly got angry and began to punch his perplexed friends, who started to cry and ran home. Ben looked up at Sid with tear-filled eyes and said, "He's stupid," and continued to play with a dark father figure in his hand. Simone called them over for dinner, and after eating something and preparing himself a few sandwiches to take with him, he gathered all his things and said goodbye to his grandmother and Maya, who was no longer scared of him, and silently said, "Snit," when he kissed her on the cheek. Then he followed Ben to his aunt's car, and she drove him down to the former air base in the neighbor town, where the festival was supposed to take place. Shortly after Simone had exclaimed, "3 more kilometers," they came to a halt at the end of a long row of cars. After considering their options for a few moments, Sid said goodbye, thanked them for the ride, and jumped out to make the rest of the road by walking. He passed the line of waiting cars that filled the air with fumes and a diverse range of music. After a few minutes of walking, a fence appeared to his left, behind which the tent-filled hills of the festival area rose into the sky. But with every step Sid took towards its entrance, his heart sank lower. He looked up into the gray sky above and was painfully aware that she was here. He remembered how she had told him about a month ago that Jay was going to the festival with his car, and that she planned to persuade him to take them with him. She probably had persuaded him to take her. Sid was about to collapse under the weight of his backpack and dark thoughts when he saw 2 girls dressed in orange standing beside the road. He walked up to them and asked for the shortest way for people who arrived on foot, and they pointed him towards a small metal bridge over which a colony of backpackers walked over onto the fenced-in realms of freedom.